Guys, we're right on the hour, so I'm going to go ahead and get going. We've got a significant number of attendees already online with us today. Welcome to another educational opportunity brought to you by Controlled Product Systems Group. This is part of the Safety Leadership series of events. The genesis of Safety Leadership campaign was the new UL 325 6th edition changes. This is where we dive in and into the details and unpack for you how these changes are going to affect your business and the industry in general. But the campaign has quickly become part of the fabric of what CPSG is all about and our commitment to educate our employees and customers to promote a culture of safety. My name is Zach Eichenberger. I'm the product manager for CPSG. Just a little bit of housekeeping. I've got all of you muted at this time just to deal with any background noise. Daniel, I was talking to Daniel earlier. We'd like to go through the presentation and then we'll unmute the phones for any Q&A at the end, if you don't mind. So I'm very happy to have HySecurity with us today. They're a key vendor for control products and a fan favorite among many of you. Today we've got Daniel Butler, technical trainer and engineer, as well as Brian Kinnear, electrical engineer, and I believe maybe a guest appearance from Brian Denault, president of HySecurity. So we're very well represented by these gentlemen. So now I will step out of the way and hand it over to you, Daniel.
Thank you, Zach. Zach, can you see our screen now? Are we good?
I'm passing control now.
Okay. And Zach, do I have to click anything here?
Yeah, you have to accept presenter role.
Okay, let me see if that pops up. I'm doing that. How about now, Zach?
I've got you. We can see it.
Okay. Are we good for everyone here? I'm going to start the PowerPoint. Zach, can you see that?
Yep, we can see the PowerPoint presentation.
Okay, so we're getting started here. So the topic here is UL 325, the new changes in UL 325, which take effect, as we all know, January 12th, and HySecurity's approach to monitoring entrapment protection systems. Two parts. We're going to quickly review some of the changes in the 6th edition of UL 325, the one that's dated May 26, 2015, and takes effect just around the corner for all of us, January 12th. The second part then is how is HySecurity addressing these new changes in UL 325 and what we're doing to accommodate those changes in our gate operators. All right, part one here, guys. We're going to start here. This is section 31.1.1 from UL 325. This statement has not changed. This has been around since about 2000, but we want to start this to really highlight this thing that says at least two independent entrapment protection means, and we're going to talk about that table 31.1 that you see on the screen. A smaller version of that will be looking at that in a bigger way here in a screen or two. One exception that's been changed is for barrier arms.
Is he just done?
As you see. So we're starting off on this one, and I was just mentioning quickly that exception that has changed from 2 feet to 16 inches. That's for consistency with ASTM F2200. But we're going to look closer at the chart here, and there's quite a few changes here. Here's on the left, you can see the current table, right? Current table 31.1, and on the right is the new one that's changing. The things that are highlighted in that pinkish color here, as you can see, they've gotten rid of the usage class. Right? So they're not separating the table by usage class anymore. And they've gotten rid of the terminology, the nomenclature of primary and secondary, because, first of all, it was confusing in the sense that usually the secondary was probably the more important of the two sensors to have on there, but primary implies that that's greater importance. So they're getting rid of the primary, secondary terminology. If you look at the bottom of the screen, we're also getting rid of the type E. The audio alarm is not an entrapment protection sensor or device. It's a warning device. Now, as I move over to to the table on the right, 31.1, you can see it's been streamlined and simplified. I wanted to point out that part in the section that I've highlighted that says both the opening and closing direction is in accordance with the requirement. And also, we wanted to point out that where it talks about a single device can cover one direction. If you had a single device, such as a wraparound edge, that could cover both directions, and that would fulfill the requirement. When we're looking at an entrapment device, we're looking at monitoring it for a cycle, and a cycle being an open and close. And this statement here, you could have a device like a photoelectric sensor covering one direction and an edge covering the other, and that would be looked at as one device because it's one of those is covering each direction. Am I being clear on that? Brian, do you want to elaborate on that, or is that okay? Let's continue on. Audio alarm. The audio alarm is a required device, and the audio alarm is supposed to signal upon two sequential activations of an entrapment device. So the audio alarm is a warning device no longer considered a Type B device. For HySecurity, audio alarms have been on our product since 2000 for the last 15 years. It's an adjustable warn before operating audible alarm as anyone who's installed our product is familiar with. And it'll beep 3 times before moving the gate, and you have the choice of either continuing that for the first, continuing it for another 2 or 3 seconds, like we did the 2 seconds, or the duration of the gate's movement. This is the big one for our industry, monitoring external entrapment protection sensors. For every movement of the gate, every cycle, an open and close, it's required to have a monitored entrapment protection sensor, whether that's a photoelectric sensor or a gate edge.
And the monitoring is, for us, is done at the beginning of the cycle, which we'll get to a little bit later on. But that doesn't mean that it's not actually monitored the entire cycle. So we're looking for the device at the beginning of the cycle, and we're also looking that the device isn't tripped the rest of the cycle. So it's looking for it at the beginning meets the requirement for UL 325, but we're always looking at the device and making sure it doesn't trip. And if it does trip, we react to it accordingly.
Let me go back one screen too, I'm sorry. On that first statement too, I've gone back a few screens. We've also added additional responsibility. Keep in mind where it says that at installation, both entrapment protection devices must be installed. That's putting the onus on the installer to make sure that they identify entrapment risk, and also, once identified, put on the proper entrapment protection devices to cover those. Forgot to say that earlier. Audio alarm, and we just talked about the monitoring external entrapment protection sensors. Here's a change to emergency access control location. We all know that the access control is supposed to be 6 feet away from the gate panel. We have an exception. You can see it there. Emergency access controls have to be in the line of sight. Right? To summarize those changes, again, at least 2 independent entrapment protection means that hasn't been a change. That's been there since 2000.
And one of those independent means is the Type A that's included with all the UL 325 gate operators, HySecurity builds that require entrapment protection.
So that would satisfy one of them, and then you would have to have a second one, external, that would cover both directions, the open and closed direction. So this is Brian, I want to step in there and really emphasize that point, because there's some confusion. One of those independent means is typically for most manufacturers an inherent sensor. The second one are the external sensor or sensors. But the key area of confusion here is that for the external sensor to count as the second device, it must serve to protect against entrapment in both directions of travel. There aren't very many ways to do that with one sensor. So generally, especially on a slide gate, that would mean that 2 external sensors are required. edge sensor or a photo beam to protect both directions of gate movement. That's kind of the key touch spot there that could be a little confusing for some people.
Thank you, Brian. So as we continue down the summary here, again, I already talked about the responsibility of the start of the installer to identify entrapment risk and to install 2 independent entrapment protection sensors at installation time. And here's the big one we already talked about, monitoring for presence and correct operation of contact and non-contact sensors once every cycle, a cycle defined as an open and close. We mentioned the exception for a barrier arm to 16 inches from a rigid object. It used to be 2 feet, right? Audio alarm is required. It's no longer considered an entrapment protection device, so it's not a Type E. And it's supposed to alarm or alert on 2 sequential activations of an entrapment protection device. The next bullet down, primary, secondary, and usage class have been removed from that table 31.1. And they've streamlined or simplified. I put clarified in question there because there is some question about covering open and closed distance directions, so that's why I put that there. Emergency access controls, already mentioned, the fire department access can be in line inside the gate, does not have to be outside the 6-foot area from the gate. And I didn't have slides on these, but usage class 2 and 3 have been, the wording has changed a bit. Basically, usage class 2 is buildings accessible to the general public, and class 3 is not accessible to the general public. So, all right, so that summarizes really the changes we've had in the UL 325 and that we're addressing with our HySecurity gate operators. So how is HySecurity addressing these changes? Well, we'll talk about the gate operators and how we're doing monitored external entrapment protection sensor support there. But documentation, we're updating a lot of our documentation, of course. Part of the ETL process requires that we have certain documentation inside our manuals talking about safety, right, Mike? And so that's part of the ETL process on testing. We've updated our quick start guide, safety brochures, and this. And number 3, training. We're doing things like the webinar. We'll be doing presentations at FEMSEC coming up. Our RSMs on the field will be doing lunch and learns. So we're really getting the message out. We are part of that team of being the evangelists for spreading the word on safety, as all of us should be. So how will HySecurity implement these new requirements of UL 325 within our gate operators? These are the common methods we've seen out there today. There are 3 ways to monitor an external entrapment sensor. The one highlighted is in gate number 1, normally closed. That's the path we're going down. The other 2 are 10K ohm resistor. We see those like in the Miller edges. And then pulse. And pulse needs to be 2-wire, or you can have, if you have separate power, be a 4-wire connection.
To elaborate a little bit on what does normally closed mean when we monitor a circuit, we have a input on our board where all the common wires for your power supply to your device will land. It's called the sensor common. When the gate operator is given a command to run, we will turn on the device utilizing that sensor common input, and we will look for a delay of the relay output of the device closing. And if there's no delay, then and it's just jumpered out, we'll declare a false. Or if we never see the closure of the contact, we'll assume that the device isn't plugged in or it's already tripped, and we won't run the gate. So we look for that little bit of delay right at startup. You won't notice any difference especially with the buzzer activated, any difference in startup of the gate, or with the buzzer shut off. You won't notice any delay in startup because all this is done right as the command is given to the operator.
Thank you, BJ. So for us to make this change in monitoring those normally closed contacts or inputs, we're doing it with a software change. There's no hardware change we have to accommodate. It's definitely a new version for our Smart DC controller and our Smart Touch controller. So Smart Touch controller is the main circuit board on our hydraulic gate operators. Smart DC controller for the Smart DC, the 24-volt DC powered systems. So those are the version numbers coming out here. Those will be coming out in a couple days, right?
we're just around the corner. So, and the one change we'll have on our boards, and we'll show a couple photos of it coming up here, but we're going to rename some of the sensors. So the gate edge, photo eye open, photo eye closed, we're going to call those all sensor 1, 2, or 3. And we don't care what you hook up to it. It could be a photo eye or a gate edge. It's defined in the software, and we'll go over that coming up right there. So there'll be some different labels on our board. Initially, the boards that we put out, because we manufacture a lot of boards ahead of time, will have paper labels that you can put over that. Instead of saying edge, it'll say sensor 1, and instead of photo eye open, it'll say sensor 2. All right, but just a label. And so, what is the software changing? We're adding a new menu item. The key here is build year, BY. It's initially set to 0, which means it's, the gate is disabled or it hasn't been set yet. And when we build, starting this in 2016, starting in 2016, all the build, can you hear me okay? Hopefully you can. Starting in 2016, all our gate operators built will have the build year set to 2. So that means that they were built in 2016. If you were taking an existing operator and updating the software, and you would have to set that build year parameter. If it was built before this year, manufactured before 2016, you set that to build year 1. Okay, as we move down here, build year 1 continues to function as it had before, the new UL 325 2016, right? So that's prior to this, to 2016 changes. Build year 2, we've added 3 new menu items to that. It's to accommodate those 3 sensors that I just mentioned. So sensor 1, 2, and 3. This is where you hook up your contact and non-contact sensors. As you see, if you look down below that, below where it says if build BY equals 2, below that are the settings for either S1, S2, or S3. That's why it says S pound. S pound could be S1 or S2 or 3. They're initially set to disable. You will have to set all 3 of those upon initial setup. So you'll get a prompt, just like when you get a brand new operator and you see that when you first turn it on, it displays UC, so you have to set UC. If it's a slide gate, you set handing. There's a few initial setup settings that you set. You'll see that will now, if it's a build year 2, you'll see in S1. It's initially set to disable. Whatever you have connected to S1 is what you will define here. If you're not using it, it would be a 1. If you have an I in the closed direction, it would be a 2. If you have an I that covers both directions, that would be a 7.
To elaborate on that a little bit, the I both is going to allow you to have only one external entrapment sensor, and that would be spanning from the edge of the roadway all the way to the catch area for the slide gate. So we're the full length of travel of the slide gate. Again, this isn't going to be used very often because you need a pretty powerful through beam photo eye for that, and even those are going to be limited to how long your actual gate is. So it's just an option out there, though. If you do have a shorter slide gate, that you can get away with only one device and have the momentary operation in both directions of travel. There's a little note there on the side that if all the devices are set to not use, then the default operation is a constant hold to open and a constant hold to close the gate. This is, in essence, is going to be a Type D device, and that's the other type of entrapment safety device that's allowed by UL 325. You can also set it up, not that you would want to do this necessarily, but you can set it up that our software determines if there's enough sensors in a given direction. So if you program it up to have 3 I closes and nothing in the open direction, then we'll default to constant pressure in the open direction. But as soon as we see it, enough devices in each direction, then we'll allow momentary operation in both directions.
Yeah, so this is handy. We were talking to one of the installers, and when they're setting up the gate operator, they set up the operator and then run it to see that it's now functioning properly before they put on their loops and other peripheral devices. So this is the way that you can set all the sensors, S1, S2, and S3, to 1, not used, and you can still operate the gate by doing the constant pressure to move the gate, right, for your setup. So, and then you go back once you put on your your contact and non-contact sensors, you can go and reset those settings, the S1, S2, or S3.
In the installer menu.
In the installer menu to the appropriate value. All right. And here's just a chart that's showing, I've mentioned on the board, we're renaming some things. So here we are on the SDC board in the lower left, input number 13 and radio options. So if you looked at our board, and you'll see a photo of that coming up here. Input number 13 is the edge sensor. That's going to be now, it's going to have a new name. It's going to be called sensor 1. And you can see 14 and 15 for photo eye power. We're going to call those sensor com. 17 and 19, photo eye open will be sensor 2. Photo eye close will be sensor 3. Right? And again, it doesn't matter what you hook up to sensor 1, 2, or 3. It can either be a photo eye or an edge.
Yeah, they're configurable for type of device and direction of travel. Want to reiterate on 14 and 15, those are the terminals you're going to plug in the common wire for the power to your device. So you'll plug in typically 24 volts DC to our power supply board, and then the common would be plugged into 14 and 15.
And just to point out, you can see where it says new name on both the STC and SDC, sensor 1 or S1. Those are really synonymous, right?
Yeah.
It's the edge sensor number 13, and also at the bottom of our boards, whether it's STC or SDC, there's a section called radio options, and there's an edge spade connector there. That one we call S1, but it's the same as the other one, right, Brian?
Yeah, they're in parallel with each other. They're not two different inputs. So if you program a sensor to use sensor 1 input, then you can either plug it into 13 terminal or to the edge terminal. Now it's going to be called S1 at the bottom of the board. You can't plug a different device into each one.
Here's just a slide that shows some of the labels that we're creating, because initially we have a bunch of boards and they've already got silk screened on them, edge sensor and photo eye open and photo eye close. Well, we're not going to get rid of those boards. We're going to use them until we run out of those boards. Then the new boards will have the silk screening right on the printed circuit board itself. So initially we'll put labels on. And then once we start having it silk screened on the boards, there's going to be times when you send out boards for pre-build year 2, and so we're going to have stickers there that would put on there to put on back on the old names for the pre-2016 operators. Hopefully that's clear. All right. And here's this slide here shows SDC inputs. This one shows SDC. So we'll have some labels. Here's the location of the sensor. Here's the smart DC controller. You can see on the left there where it says eye open, that's now sensor 2. Right below that is eye closed, that's sensor 3. And then coming down, you see the edge, and that's now called sensor 1. And then you see the other red arrow that goes over that spade connector under radio options. And then there's the sensor com. Same thing with the STC board here. Here's a chart that's obviously we have to go through ETL testing for all this, and we went through that in December and tested all these devices. So I'll let Brian talk about that a little bit. Go ahead, Brian.
So the UL standard requires that the manufacturer of gate operators either supply with the operator any approved device or provide a list in the manual or somewhere of the approved devices that have been tested and will work with the operator. This is the list as it stands now. As more devices are added or the manufacturer goes through UL 325 testing on their end, then we'll add more to this list. Want to just clarify something. UL and ETL do the same thing. They both test to a release standard. So we have tested with ETL for years, and will continue to do so. It's the same testing that you would get if we went to UL. We just have the relationship already built, so we have an ETL listed operators to the UL 325 standard.
All right, here's some examples of some hazard zones or entrapment protection zones, and Brian's going to talk a little bit about these.
One thing we're going to want to see, I'm going to go back to the last slide. is that you'll see that there's a new wireless edge link from Miller Edge. This is actually a monitored wireless link. Old transmitters and receivers didn't have the ability to monitor an edge, and I don't think there's any out there that I know of right now that are capable with all operators to monitor the edge and then output back to the operator that the edge is actually functioning fine and present. So this is going to be a little more expensive than what you're used to. So what how HySecurity feels is that most people and most installers have been used to putting an edge on the leading end and trailing end of the gate, those hazard zones A and B there. And those aren't necessarily the most dangerous hazard zones. The most dangerous ones we feel like are going to be right there at E, and they call it the center post in this drawing. Kind of the drawing zone from where the gate, when it's opening, if somebody's riding on the gate, they could get sucked in between the fence or wall and the gate itself. So if you put a fixed edge there, so a hardwired edge there, you don't need the radio transmitter and receiver that you would need if you had the edge on the actual gate. So you can protect in the open direction to travel with just a hardwired edge and wire that with a module into our board. You can see the entire travel direction should probably be protected somehow on the secure side of the gate, and then right there in the closed direction on the public side of the gate. Swing gate doesn't have as many entrapment zones or hazard zones as you would see on a slide gate, especially if you're not opening near a rigid object. So if you don't have a fence right parallel with the gate when it's open, you don't have to worry as much about that. But what we're saying in swing gates is you want to have the leading edge protected of the gate with an edge. And again, since the hinge doesn't move much, you could use a hardwired edge if you wanted to on the leading edge. And we recommend a wraparound style edge, and this is one that can protect in both the open and closed directions. And you notice on the previous slide that there's the option to program up an edge that protects both directions of travel, and that's what it's referring to as one of those wraparound styles that Miller Edge provides. The reason for that is it allows you to program up only one device and have only one external device on your operator, and as long as there's no other hazard zone or entrapment zone that you need to protect, you're able to get the gate operational with just one device. And when I say operational, that's with momentary context. A vertical lift gate, there's different options on this, and on this, UL 325 only requires the closed direction of travel be protected, mainly because they're usually guarded in the opening direction, or they're not opening up against a rigid object. So if somebody did happen to climb it, there's not a risk of entrapment in that direction. So what you're going to see there is either install an edge or a photo eye that protects the closed direction of travel.
Thanks, Brian. So just to summarize, HySecurity's approach to monitored entrapment protection sensors or devices is normally closed. We're implementing that strictly in the software. We've added 4 new menu items. Build here is the primary one that says, is this being built in 2016 or prior? Then we've added the 3 sensors, S1, S2, and S3. We're renaming those terminal inputs on the SDC and SDC boards. We're providing you a list of selected and tested external entrapment, external monitored entrapment protection sensors. And the key to this too is if you, even though you don't have to go retroactive, if you desire to do that, you can do that by taking an existing gate operator and updating the software and putting on the appropriate, at least 2 monitored external entrapment sensors that we've tested with this, and you're good to go. So you can take an older operator and make it current by updating software and putting on the appropriate external entrapment sensors. And to make this transition easier, because we know whenever change comes or there's some confusion in the industry and different manufacturers are doing things differently, HySecurity is bundling with each gate operator a Miller GEM, the GEM 104. That's what's that called? The GEM is the
it's the gate edge module.
Thank you.
What that is in the past, an edge was always a normally open device because it's just two strips of metal inside of it that when it hits something, it closes the circuit. Well, to monitor an edge, you can't really monitor, you can't monitor a normally open contact. So what the edge manufacturers are doing is adding a 10K resistor to the end of the circuit, to the end of the two metal strips, so that there's always a small amount of current flow through the device, which can be monitored by the a control board or something. What the Miller GEM is a device to monitor the 10K output from the edge and convert that to a normally closed contact for HySecurity gate operators to monitor. So they're looking for the 10K and we're looking for the normally closed contact, so it completes the circuit for us to monitor an edge device now.
And if we needed more than 3 sensor inputs, how would we do that? Use the solution, right?
Getting into a little bit more about the devices. So there's a monitored gate edge. You're not gonna looking at it from afar, you're not gonna see any difference between an old gate edge and a new gate edge. The new gate edges are actually going to be marked with a blue piece of tape on the wire, and that's going to indicate that it has a 10K resistor installed on it. If for some reason you don't know for sure, you can always hook up a multimeter and check the resistance on the wires. So if the blue tape fell off or something, you can check to see if it's a new edge or an old edge.
So I want to jump in here and say that this distinction is going to be really important for both distributors and installers, because if you use an old style edge without the 10K resistor, you end up with one of those on the field in a new install. It cannot be monitored unless it has the 10K resistor. So there's a transition here of inventory and recognition that in order for an edge sensor to be monitored, the Miller product, they're going to put a blue band on the wire coming out of the edge to indicate it's got a 10K resistor. But if you show up on the job site with a old style edge that does not have the 10K resistor, it cannot be monitored. It won't be recognized by the gate operator as anything, because it's just a normally open contact, which is a disconnected pair of wires. On the other hand, if you use an edge with a 10K resistor on an old style 2015 operator, it's probably not going to be compatible. So you need edges without the resistors for old operators, and you must have edges with the resistors for the new operators. So that's going to be a key piece of awareness there. Thank you, Brian. Is there anything, DK, that you need to elaborate on, or should we open it up to question and answer?
I just want to talk a little bit about a couple new devices. This is the monitored gate link that I was mentioning earlier. It can monitor 2 different transmitters. So you can have an edge, so if you have a slide gate, you can have an edge on the leading end of the gate and an edge on the trailing end of the gate. Make sure they go to 2 different transmitters, and you can see it has 2 different outputs on the, I don't know if you can see my mouse, 2 different outputs on the receiver that would plug into the 2 different sensors on our board. And this is what the GEM looks like. So you see the white and black wire, that's where the edge is going to plug in. The red, 2 red wires are power, so that's 24 volts and common. One of those red wires is going to go to sensor common, so we switch on the device, look for the closure of the normally closed contact, and make sure that the edge is actually plugged in and functional. And then the 2 green wires are going to go to either sensor common or common, and then the other wire would go to your program sensor input, either sensor 1, sensor 2, or sensor 3. And that's going to be the same regardless of device. So if it's a photo eye with a normally closed contact, you take the same wire to either any device that you got, or excuse me, any sensor input that you have programmed for a photo eye. If you need more than 3 devices, Miller's actually come up with what they call the solution. It's a multi-input module, and that allows up to 6 additional sensors. So if you have 6 sensors plugged into there, it has 2 outputs, so you can program have 3 devices go into 1 output, so 3 devices protecting the open direction going to output A, and 3 devices protecting the closed direction going to output B, and each one of those would go to a single sensor input on our board. So this allows you to have multiple sensors going to 1 input. If you need more than 3 sensors on a install, then you need to get this solution to monitor all of them.
I want to jump in again and clarify something. It's really important that only 1 sensor be connected to any one of our inputs, S1, 2, and 3. It can only monitor 1 sensor at a time. It's also true that as far as, say, connecting any Miller Edge to a GEM module or a Miller Edge to a wireless link module, that the transmitter for the wireless link can only monitor 1 edge sensor. A GEM module can only be connected to 1 edge sensor. So be always thinking that it's 1 device at a time, and the only way to get more than 3 devices is the solution module.
And we only showing Miller eyes here, but we have multiple, as you saw on the table earlier, we have multiple photo eyes that are approved for use with our operators. And
I think that's it.
let's open it up to some Q&A.
Let me do that right now. All right, tell you what, folks, I've got it in question and answer mode, so thank you very much, HySecurity. I think that was, I've got a few questions myself here, but if anybody would like to ask a question, because of all the background noise, please hit *6 to unmute yourself, and you can ask those questions now.
Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, I have a question on a couple of your earlier slides. By the way, my name is Jeff from National here in Syracuse, New York. And a couple of your earlier slides talked about barrier gates having similar need for devices. So on a lift arm gate, do we have to have the UL 325 alarms on those as well, or is it just swing and slides?
That's a good question. Taking you back to one of the first slides, you can see there's an exception there that an operator for a vehicle barrier arm that is not intended to move toward a rigid object closer than 16 inches and does not have a pinch point between the moving parts or something, and is installed per the manufacturer's instructions, does not require to have entrapment protection means. So for HySecurity, all of our barrier arms meet that exception as long as as you guys are following instructions and not installing them so they're opening or closing less than 16 inches from a rigid object. So no, you do not need devices on there. So if you have a new operator and it's for instance, a strong arm park operator, we set that to build year 2 here in the factory, and you guys get out in the field and set limits or get it set up. The sensor types are automatically defaulted to not used. So it'll still have the same configurable inputs. They'll just not be used. So if you do want to hook up a photo eye to one of those inputs or even an edge on the bottom of the arm, you just hook it up and you would go in and program that sensor in the installer menu to have a input to it. And those, since it's not closing to a rigid object or anything, those aren't really entrapment sensors at that point. They're more being used for object detection.
In truth, that's actually the way it's always been. A lot of words, but the standard has said for the last 15 years that if you close within 20 inches of a rigid object, you're required to protect it. So to make that the same as ASTM gap, they changed it to 16 inches. But when Brian said that the sensors will default to not used, in a barrier arm operator, not used actually means that the operator is enabled.
Yeah.
Not used in a slide or swing gate means that the operator is not enabled until you've connected at least one sensor in each direction of travel. So there's a key difference there.
And when Brian says not enabled and enabled, that means momentary operation. So you can just put a momentary open command to a barrier arm or a momentary close command or the close timer, and the barrier arm will function fine with no sensors installed. Where a slide gate, you can still run the operator, you just have to maintain constant open or close pressure, and so therefore the close timer is disabled until you have sensors in the closed direction of travel. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, the real key statement is no real difference for barrier arm gates. Another question out there?
On a retrofit, if we change on the build year to 2, is that locked in, or is there a way to do it to, if you by mistake hit build year 2 and then need to go back to build year 1, are you up a creek and have to get everything set up to be the way it is, or is there a way to go back and have that go back to build year 1?
Hey, that's a really good question there. We like the sharp questions. We kind of took a halfway in between there because we don't want people to, say less than fully trained people, to foolishly be able to take a new operator and knock it back to a pre-2016 status. So the answer is you cannot do it in the gate operator menu, but if you're using our start software and you've connected a notebook to our controls, the menu to change build year does appear in our start software. So we figure at that point the installer is more likely to be fully trained and know what they're doing and have that power of configuration.
And also, if you did set that the BY setting incorrectly, if you need a hand at that, whether it's using our start program or there's other ways we can change that, we suggest you call tech support and they'll help you through that process. But it is changeable. It's once you set it, it's something that we can change if you've made it.
And yeah, the only time you'll have to set the build year is if you're uploading new code on a existing operator, or if you're replacing a board in an operator.
Yeah, so for new operators, we set the build year in the factory. The only time that you as an installer are going to see build year is if you got a board that got blown up by lightning and you have to replace the board. You have to then tell it what gate operator type it is, slide, swing, barrier arm, vertical lift, and you have to tell it what build year it is. Once you tell it what gate operator type it is, the menu disappears. Once you tell it what type of build year it is, your menu disappears. So it's really more the same of what we've been doing all along. Yeah.
Hey, this is Zach. To be clear on a retrofit, I want to make sure you guys interpret this the same way. On a retrofit where you're swapping out an older gate operator with a new 2016 machine, you now need to bring that installation up to current standards, correct?
Yeah, if your retrofit is that entailed, meaning you are replacing an old operator with a brand new operator, then that's a newly manufactured operator that's considered a new gate system installation. So yes, you need to have it up to the new code.
If you're just replacing the board, you do not have to bring it up to the new standard.
So major distinction there. And I also want to just clarify.
That's another thing. So I want to elaborate on that a little bit. So if you have a dual gate setup and one operator gets taken out by a car, the benefit of just having software is with that new operator requiring the new code, then you can just load the new software in the other operator and have them both set up to be ready for the new standard required by the new operator, if that makes sense.
Yes, and just keep in mind you are going to need to go out to that installation with two, well actually in that case potentially 3 additional entrapment safety devices that are monitored. Yeah, you can get that.
Yeah, so that you could go out with 2 wraparound edges and be in compliance with the intent of the standard, but it's going to all depend on the site too if there's other entrapment zones.
Right.
So if you have 2 wraparound edges, one for each leading end of a dual swing gate.
On a swing gate. On a swing gate. Right.
Yeah, that'd be swing only, right?
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, wraparound edge, both directions is only for swing gates.
Yep. This is Bob Vetter with HySecurity. I had a real quick question just to clarify. If you're going out and updating software on a pre-2016 operator, are you then prompted after you install the new software to select the build year again, or does it automatically default to build year 2 when you go to the new software?
It depends. So if you have a new operator and say in next year we have a new version of software, so if you have a 2016 operator with the 450 software and we have 451 next year, if you load 451 over 450, you will not see the build year because the build year was already previously set. Right. But if you load this new software that's going to be coming out next month over existing code that's out in the field, then yes, you will be prompted for build year because it's a new menu item that has not previously been set.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Yep.
This is Joe from Burr. The current start software, is it going to be updated so you can see those fields, or will it already work?
Sorry.
Start software. We do need a new version of Start.
Yeah, you'll be able to use the same version of Start that's out there for loading code and for viewing history log, but you won't be able to use it to change menu settings because there are the added menu items. But we are working on a new revision of Start to coincide with these new release of operator software. So they will be out hopefully simultaneously, but they will be out shortly one after the other.
Yeah, this is Brian with Signature Controls out of Black Lake, Ohio. Going back to the barrier arm, I'm curious to know that with it being less than 16 inches, when we do retros, we have quite a few spots where we don't, it's less than 16 inches. Is this now meaning that not only do we need the loops, but the rebound through the barrier arm also a third entrapment protection such as a photo eye for pedestrians?
Well, again, nothing has really changed from what the standard was all along. The standard says that if the barrier arm closes within 16 inches of a wall or a catch receiver or something like that, there's an added entrapment zone there. To be perfectly honest, the operator is enabled, and it's voluntary that you as an installer are supposed to add something to protect that entrapment point. And it's always been that way since 2000. So it won't be that it's enforced in the software like monitoring a device to protect open and close and slide and swing gates. It's just a statement that we make in our manual that says that if this arm closes within 16 inches, the installer bears a responsibility to take some extra steps, but it's not a new requirement.
So is your arm
less than 16 inches from the ground when it's closed?
No, and we have a couple of scenarios where when the arm is closed, it's less than 16 inches from a wall.
Yeah, well, so UL would have, the UL standard is aimed around defining what's called entrapment zones or zones of potential entrapment. So what they're trying to say is that theoretically someone could get caught in that zone. Now, there's some installer judgment required here. If the, arm is light and flexible, bear in mind that the standard is concerned with the idea that a person could be entrapped in a gap, like being pulled into the gap between a slide gate and its fixed panel or wall. So I think that we recognize that you have to look at the type of arm, the type of people around there, but just understand that UL standard is concerned with protecting zones of entrapment where it's not just about someone getting hit, it's whether they could get entrapped in a way that they couldn't physically get out. That's what they're really being concerned about. So the point is that installers have to have judgment to look at the situations and say, is there a risk here that needs some additional protection? And really it's up to you to assess the site there. But there's nothing going to happen in the controls that are going to disable its automatic operation like what happened in the slide and the swing gate.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Surely there must be more questions out there.
Will there be any?
Go ahead.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, a question on a single slide in the opening direction. If there's plenty of room between the trailing edge and whatever stationary wall, and if it's not considered an entrapment zone, why would you still need a device as per UL?
Well, how about the post that supports the fall-over posts or the posts with the rollers on it that's supporting the gate? But the truth is, if manufacturers compare notes, really the primary cause of serious injury or death in our industry has been people that reach through from the outside near the operator as someone activates it and they get caught between the moving gate and the leading post on the fence line or that wall there. So even if you judge that the back of your gate is in some totally open area and isn't closing to where a child could be playing on the ground and get caught by the lower corner of the back of the gate, or that the back of the gate is no hazard at all, there's probably still a hazard on that leading post of the fence line or wall or whatever's supporting your gate. And that is an open direction entrapment risk.
Gotcha. Thank you.
And again, this is, just to reiterate, every gate installation is going to be different. From one slide gate to another slide gate, everything's going to be different. And it's up to you guys as the installer to look at the risk with each specific site.
Any other questions out there?
Zach, you said you had a couple of...
Most of those got answered, so good questions by the group here. But will there be any changes to part numbers of the product? It doesn't sound like there'll be any necessary reason to change part numbers, correct?
Well, actually, I was thinking, because we had a chart up there showing the part numbers of the wraparound edges, and I was going to ask an internal question. If those are the same part numbers they used to be, we need to be careful because, as I said earlier, there are going to be edge sensors without resistors and edge sensors with resistors. And certainly we know in all of our DC controllers if you add an edge sensor with a resistor that connects directly as they have for the last number of years, it's actually going to activate that input without anything touching the edge, just the 10K resistor. So, so I think that what Brian said is the MX3981 and 82 in that chart are new part numbers.
Those are the wraparound edges for either a round post or square post.
And so those are new part numbers over the current ones in the price book. The MGO product, for those of you familiar with Miller, is a lot like the ME120. They actually physically look the same on the outside. Inside the MGO is a circular gap, and it actually makes it more sensitive to detection at hits at various angles. So that is a part number. We put question marks here because we just haven't assigned the part numbers yet. Obviously down below, the wireless edge link, which is available as an independent receiver or transmitter, RX and TX, or as a kit with both. Those are totally new parts, and we haven't yet assigned them part numbers. Or maybe they were getting assigned part numbers literally as this PowerPoint was being written.
Right. And control boards will not change part. And you'll also see there, there's no part number change for our control boards. Excuse me, the EMX RB325 will still function just the same way. It'll just be used in normally closed contacts. And that's the same part number, same with the Omron E3K. Same part number there, either to be used in the normally closed contacts in light on mode. So you can use the same devices you've been used to in the past, just connect a little with a different terminal and, to our board.
We're also putting on some labels on the outside of the 2016 build operators, and so they'll be clearly identifiable as you have these sitting on the shelf in your warehouse, which are the pre-2016 models and the 2016 labels on that. Yeah, I'll elaborate on that just a bit. Again, the UL 325 standard is primarily a standard that applies to manufacturers. So we cannot label an operator as a listed product unless it conforms to the standard on January 12th. So because it does not affect, for example, distributors selling off inventory, or even to take it to the point of absurdity, if some distributor had a 2015 operator laying around and they didn't sell it until 2018, it would still be fully legitimate to install that operator as if it was year 2015 and prior. The UL standard affects the machine as we release it, not so much what you do in the field. So there's no problem with distributors in their existing inventory. It does make it important that as we ship a machine in a cardboard box, that it's pretty easy to identify on the outside of the box that it's built to the 2016 standard or whether it's an older one, because you probably wouldn't want to mix both types of machines in one installation.
I'm glad you made that distinction. So, and that goes for your inventory as well, right? So the dealer's inventory of pre-2016 product, perfectly fine to install that after January 12th. Maybe a couple things. We're kind of coming up on the hour here. We're on the hour. A couple things I want everybody to walk away with. You know, Type E, or the audible alarm, or the pre-warning, that's a very popular feature set for HySecurity, and I'd still recommend that we all utilize that. While we say Type E is going away, that's only as an acceptable entrapment protection device. So that's still very good practice to utilize the Type E in high-secure applications. It just won't count as a secondary entrapment.
Yeah, thank you for that, Zach. I will quote something I saw in the news a bunch of years back. And we all know how, like during the presidential debates, political candidates like to complain about how the press can portray them in bad lights and skewer them. But I just remember one time when a child was hurt by an automatic gate where someone hit a radio transmitter from a distance away, and the child was on the gate, and the press put into the news article about the child being injured. That when activated, and the gate jerked to a start without warning, kind of leading the reader to conclude, oh, that evil gate operator, it jerks to a start without warning. I thought, boy, that's a really wonderful prejudgment right there. But there's also a degree of truth to it. You warn before operate goes off 3 seconds before the gate moves. It is the last chance for anybody who might be reaching through a gate, climbing on a gate, or just in too close a proximity to quickly step away. And HySecurity believes it's a very valuable device. We will continue to include it. We will continue to strongly recommend that you not turn it on. It's just that UL is not counting it as an entrapment sensor because it's a warning device.
And even if you do not like the sound of it, warn before operate, don't unplug it. There's a feature in the software you can actually shut it off because it's still used to announce if there's perhaps a trip sensor or somebody does become entrapped in the gate. It's still there as a warning device, even if you don't hear the warn before operate when it's disabled in the software.
The other thing, if you did something like cut the wire or turn it on, you'd press the open or close button, and there'd be a 3-second delay where nothing happened. Right. And then the operator would jerk to a start without warning. Right. So it actually is more confusing.
Right.
When you turn off the sensor, like as in a gate installation in a condominium or apartment where it's just too close to someone's living quarters to have the thing beeping loudly, then what it also does is it takes away the 3-second time delay. The power of software.
Any other questions out there? What we're going to be sending, we'll take this entire presentation and make it into a PDF, and I'll be forwarding that to Zach. And we also have a document, an FAQ document that's where we're still reviewing, but it's just about there. We'll also forward that to Zach, so all the people on this call, Zach can send it out to you. And also at FenSec, oh, sorry, Zach. Also, a brief little commercial here, but at FenSec, we're doing 2 lunch and learns on UL 325 at lunchtime, 12 to 1 o'clock. So see us at Wednesday, Thursday at FenSec. We'll be presenting there as well. So thank you, guys. Are we there, Zach?
Yep, thank you very much to HySecurity for putting this together today. This is great information. I will be following this up to all registrants with a recording of this webinar, so you'll be able to review it or share it with colleagues. And the additional collateral that Daniel was speaking of will be included on that email. Expect that probably at some point tomorrow. And you see some contact information here. By all means, if you have any questions, you can email myself at learning@controlledproducts.com, and we'll make sure to get your questions answered.
Yeah, we'll probably also include the supplement that our tech writer, Marcia, has really put a lot of work into to our manuals, and it'll go into a lot more detail for programming up the sensors and what it'll look like on what it might look like on different types of operators and gates. We'll have to figure out how to send that because it is a big document. So easiest way we'll have to talk to you, Zach, the easiest way to get that out to everybody.
So I want to thank you, Zach, thank Controlled Products for putting this together and for emphasizing the importance of safety.
Well, it's our pleasure, and the more armed we are, the better and the smoother this is going to go. So appreciate the collaboration.
Thanks, Zach.
Thanks, guys.
All right,
Happy New Year to everyone.
Everybody have a great New Year. Yep, and have a great day. Thank you.
Thanks.